The head of the DNC announced today that Kamala Harris got enough votes from delegates to be the official nominee for the Democratic Party. And now it is time for her to choose her vice president. All right, everybody, we know that we are going to get this announcement by Tuesday, if not before then. Not who do you want, and I'm going to start with you, Pablo. Strategically speaking, who do you think is the best choice?
Yeah, I just keep on going back to the electoral map and looking at Pennsylvania. I love the idea of Tim Walz being the ultimate contrast to J.D. Vance, a person whose primary philosophy is self-interest and has so many inconsistencies that it would be delicious to imagine Walz just picking him apart in ways that expose how artificial he is on the substance and the ideology that he's now purporting. So obviously, I enjoy that premise. When it comes to just the math of this, Steph, if you can tell me that Josh Shapiro gives us a better chance of seeing Pennsylvania go blue, then I'm going Josh Shapiro. And I want to just be a mathematically minded person about this, as much as that's not quite as satisfying and maybe more complicated when it comes to the left and the issues, of course, of the Middle East and all of the things that are in Josh Shapiro's college resume, let's say, as we're looking through the op-eds he wrote. All of that could be a problem. But if you can tell me the electoral math is mathing, as they say, I would lean in that direction.
I'd like to point out, Pablo, I'm pretty sure you're the only person here who says the word mathing. Juanita, what do you think? Mathing.
So, yes, I'm thinking about the electoral map as well. But the other ingredient I'm thinking about, Stephanie, is the reality of who does the vice president vibe with. That energy, that chemistry is going to be critical, because I think she's going into this search considering who she can lean on, who she can collaborate with, and who will serve as a trustworthy thought partner who she can deploy to do her bidding, right? That's the role that she's played to President Biden, and something that I think she's going to be leaning on. I know it's been reported she had a 90-minute conversation with Pete Buttigieg earlier today. And so I'm thinking about how these conversations are going, how long she's spending with each individual, because sure, the resumes check out. Yes, there are some electoral benefits, not just with Shapiro, but with Senator Kelly as well. But who does she have a chemistry with and a level of trust with is going to also be critical in this equation.
And you think that is who?
Steph, don't make me say it. Like, here's the thing.
I'm going to make you say it.
I'm hedging. I'm hedging because no one knows. I've seen that video coming out the mayor of Philadelphia's office. It makes me cringe, actually, because the vice president can't be forced into picking Shapiro, no matter how many promo videos they release or leak. But I think also there's somebody like Beshear, governor of Kentucky, who is still in the running here, who would have broad appeal to Republicans and independents who are never Trumpers, who would have broad appeal on, as a white man, also speaking up about abortion rights and reproductive rights and fighting for that in a Republican-controlled state of Kentucky. So I'm going to go with Beshear if you're making me say a name, Steph.
And Evan, where do they all go after Tuesday, right? 3 weeks ago, people across this country had never heard of Tim Walz. They didn't know Andy Beshear. They didn't know Wes Moore. And now you've got scores of Americans enthused, excited, thrilled about these next generation Democrats and the leaders they could be for us on a national level. Come Wednesday, for those on this list who don't get picked, are they just going to go back to their home states, be governors, and we're not going to see them again? Or does Kamala Harris have a different plan for sort of the Avengers of the Democratic Party?
Well, I'm not sure what her plan is, but I have to say, I think your question is so great. This is why I love being on your show, Stephanie, because you got that reporter brain. And like, I have that reporter brain too, as much as I can. And I spent the last actually few days talking to the lieutenant governors under these governors that are being considered for vice president. And the most interesting thing about this is that the lieutenant governor core of the Democratic Party is the most diverse part of the Democratic Party. There's 80% of them are women or people of color, and they are just looking in awe on this moment where a second in command steps up when an older white guy says he can no longer serve and steps back, and by doing that, she could lift up another one of these futures of the Democratic Party. If Shapiro gets the job, Pennsylvania gets its first black governor, 34 years old, Austin Davis. If Walsh gets the job. Peggy Flanagan becomes the governor, and she'd be the first Native woman governor of Minnesota. These are huge tectonic shifts in the party that are sitting right underneath the surface.
Yep.
And it's all happening because of this idea of what happens when a second in command rises up and takes that job. And so when it comes to who she's going to pick, I have to say there's nobody who knows better what the job requirements of vice president are than Vice President Kamala Harris. So I'm going to let her make her choice there. But what she's already triggering is this conversation about what is the next phase of the Democratic Party, what is the future of the Democratic Party, and she's raising to the surface all these other people like her all across the country that you're going to hear a lot more about in the coming years, I'm telling you.
Val Schneider?
Yeah, the story that's the best story here is the guy who's definitely not going to get picked, Roy Cooper of North Carolina. That poor dude can't leave his state because his lieutenant governor, who's not one of the ones you just talked about, is a cuckoo. And every time Roy leaves, this guy like changes laws and stuff, and the people of North Carolina would just be too mad at him. I thought he was a good candidate, Southern guy, good stuff that he's got behind him, and a big abortion rights fighter. That to me is the story of the week: is that this guy can't be run for vice president because he can't leave his damn state.
Pablo, I'd like to give you the opportunity to dog on Yale since you're a Harvard man. Is there a risk that J.D. Vance, given how badly he's doing, given that it seems like there is an unlimited supply of ridiculous media clips, bananas things he has said over the last 6 years, do you think he could actually hurt Donald Trump's chances? I mean, Trump himself just said the other day, It doesn't really matter who you pick for VP. They don't do anything.
Yeah, well, that was my favorite part of the NABJ appearance, was when he basically said, look, this J.D. Vance thing really doesn't matter that much, right, guys? Like, this doesn't really matter. The fact that we're unearthing podcast interviews from the strangest corners of the internet every week, it seems, in which he's basically saying, hey, those rights that you expect to have as a normal person in America, hoping to have a family, you don't get those. Trump is hoping that we just stop talking about J.D. Vance. And of course, J.D. Vance, who I've already sort of mentioned in terms of the artifice of his ideology, is somebody who does not stand up when you put him to the light. There is clear inconsistency in his past. Of course, the stuff he said about Trump being akin to Hitler and private text messages and so forth. But I want to make a larger point here about this stuff, which is that this redounds to Donald Trump, who listened reportedly to Elon Musk and to David Sachs and to all of these people who are the tech billionaires that I've talked to you about on this show, who want him as their guy. And what Donald Trump did was outsource some proxy sense of what America wants to the least relatable people in America, who are the Silicon Valley billionaires. And so when it comes to Donald Trump being again, sports metaphor alert, a general manager who is hiring people to work for him, just keep in mind, he's now picked, besides J.D. Vance, 8 people who have been sentenced to prison, about 24 people who now say, we will not support Donald Trump, whether it's James Madison, Mike Pence, and Bill Barr, and Mark Milley, and Mark Esper, and Rex Tillerson, and Chris Christie, and John Bolton, and John Kelly. And yes, there's a list on my computer here that I can just read endlessly. Anthony Scaramucci. He's bad at picking people who are going to get along with him, let alone be good at the job. So all of this feels disastrous in ways that should have been predictable when you listen to who was recommending this guy for the job in the first place.
But of course, reminding our audience, J.D. Vance was just a paper doll for those Silicon Valley investors. They just needed a person that they could make sure they had a bat phone into the White House. And he had a perfect front because he seemingly represents the Rust Belt or not. I know I'm out of time, but Ali, I have to ask you this question. What did you think when Donald Trump went after Kamala Harris for being biracial? How complicated is he making things for his own VP, J.D. Vance, who's the father of 3 biracial kids? Knowing how Donald Trump's mind works, that couldn't have been an accident.
And I got to say, though, as a person, I'm one racial, but as you know, I've referred to myself as a Kenyan-born Muslim because I used to call Barack Obama that, and he was never at any of the meetings. But not only am I Kenyan-born, my parents are South African, my family's Indian, Muslims, and they came from Canada. I don't struggle with any of this stuff. No people who are of different identities and multiple identities and multi-race struggle with this stuff. They don't get up on a Tuesday and say, which one am I now? And Donald Trump would know that if he were in touch with regular Americans. So, A, it didn't land because it was trying to make a black black audience think that she's not black. That didn't land. But everybody in that audience understands the complexities of different identities. So it works with nobody except his base audience. Felt like a trial balloon, felt like a message to his audience that he can walk into the lion's den. But to your point, Stephanie, neither that nor the J.D. Vance pick expands the base. So Donald Trump's going to be very secure in his base that loves everything he said. More Americans don't sit there and listen to that stuff and say, what a great idea. That was really smart of him.